Sooner or later, everyone needs to sculpt a tree branch. At least it seems like it anyway. Tree branches are a great exercise to practice because they are very organic and freeform, yet most branches follow certain kinds of patterns and rhythms. A common mistake is to make branches that are too smooth and curve too softly. In this video, I'll show some ways of making branches that are interesting, naturalistic, and original. So let's take a look. I'm just going to start out with a basic sphere and a default scene, and we'll start building out from here. I'm going to use one of the curve brushes for this. Let's hit B, C, and F, or curve multi-tube. Okay, let's zoom out to give ourselves some room. Let's imagine that the sphere is kind of the base of the branch. So I'll get a bigger draw size here, and we'll just draw something out. Actually, I'm in symmetry mode, so I'll hit X to turn off symmetry. And we'll just draw out some sort of random branchy shape. And this is just telling us that our sphere has subdivision levels. So let me go ahead and delete lower subdivision levels to lower, and then we can just click on that curve we already made to fill it with a tube. Okay, from here we can keep adding sub branches. So I'm going to rotate my view a little bit so I have a branch coming out at a different angle. And I want to get close with my cursor to that branch so that I get that red line. That means we can connect the two. So I'm just going to start drawing a new one from right here. And let me rotate around a little bit more, and we'll just draw another one. Oops, looks like that one didn't take. Let me try that again. And there's something a little bit weird about that one. I'm going to undo that and try it from a different angle. Okay, let's see how this one works. Okay, not too bad. There's occasionally something weird with this where it starts out with a really straight line, but we can adjust that later on. Okay, now that we've got a start going with some branch shapes, let's go ahead and clear the curve by clicking in an open area without being close enough to where it creates that red line. So I'm just going to click right here on the sphere so we get rid of the curve. Now we're just left with the geometry. Now let's get some basic thick to thin going here. So I want the base here to be thicker, and then I want them to taper to be thinner towards the ends. So let's get the inflate brush for that. B, I, and N for inflate. Or you can just click here. Let's get a really big draw size on this, and actually we're kind of maxing out the maximum draw size here. You can turn off dynamic by holding down Shift and tapping on dynamic there. Okay, now we can get a draw size that makes more sense. Okay, so I just want to inflate a little bit here at the base. Just going to build that up. And now I can hold down Alt and inflate inward so it tapers a little smaller towards the tips. Doesn't have to be super precise right now, just something very general. Even though everything is one subtool, there's still kind of separate pieces to each one of these branches and to the base. So let's Dynamesh it all together into one. So let's go to, under Geometry, let's find Dynamesh. And I want to set the resolution pretty low because we don't need any fine detail here at this point. So maybe 40 is good. Actually, I'll just type in 40 here. And we'll clear the mask. Just Control, click, and drag in an open area. And now let's run that Dynamesh. Okay, so if I hit Shift F to turn on wireframe, you can see now we've got a Dynameshed mesh as opposed to that generated tube. So from here, I'm just going to smooth out anything that looks a little too jagged or harsh. Okay, let's start adjusting the shape of this a little bit. You can see from different angles, some of these branches are really straight. And that's because when we drew out the curves, they were only curvy on one planar surface, but they weren't curvy in other directions. So let's get the move brush, BMV. Get a little smaller brush here, and just start tweaking out the shape of this. Now you can see as I'm pulling this out, the shape, it's pretty soft. It's a really noodly, snaky curve. So in order to make that look a little bit more natural and kind of more organic, I want kind of a sharper corner on this brush when I'm moving things. So let me undo that with Control Z. And let's go under Brush and open up Curve and turn on AccuCurve. So now you'll see what happens is when I pull this, there's a corner on it. Pulls out into a nice sharp corner. So this helps things look a bit more natural, a bit more organic, not quite so snaky. And you can get different sizes here on your brush for bigger or smaller angles that you might want to make. And you just kind of want to go all around and start pulling this in different unexpected ways. You want to keep things looking very organic and natural. You don't want to get things looking too predictable. Just looking all around, seeing for different places where it might make sense to just grab this shape and kind of reform it a little bit. Just creating some unexpected bits of randomness. And something I like to do at this point is also make a few occasional little really intense shifts in direction. So for example, maybe making it kind of loop back on itself somewhat. You can do all kinds of interesting shapes like that. Just something to add interest. You know, feel kind of like Bob Ross here, making some happy little curves and branches. And maybe I'll smooth down this so it's a little bit sharper, a little bit more narrow at the tip. And I like to pay special attention to the branching points. I like to get sharper in that area. So you can just kind of carve that in. Just something to add interest. Okay, not too bad. Looks good. Okay, so we could spend a lot of time doing that, but let me move on to some other tools that I like to use. One of them is the spiral brush. So if you hit B, S, and let's see, it's right here, and A should be the third letter for the combination there. So what this does is you just click and drag, and it just sort of twists up the shape. You can hold Alt and it'll twist the opposite direction. So I like to go around with this and just kind of twist things up a little bit. Just creating some unexpected bits of randomness. Don't want anything to look too predictable. So I just want to sculpt something that looks kind of organic and natural, just creating some unexpected randomness. And from here, we could continue to add detail just by sculpting it on a little bit more traditionally with the clay brush, perhaps B, C, and let's see, maybe I'll get clay, just the regular clay brush here. And now with this, you can kind of look for interesting forms that you might want to accentuate. Maybe the branch formed with some particular surface direction to it. So you can just kind of carve that in. Maybe a higher intensity and a smaller draw size. Holding down Alt, you can carve in some cracks, any sort of interesting shape that might form in this branch. Maybe even higher intensity here. Just want to really carve in a crack there. And of course, here's where you get into a point where you could kind of spend all day on it and kind of work out what the bark pattern looks like. Get the DAM standard brush out. So B, D, S. And with this, what you might do is kind of carve in some sharper creases and folds and interesting patterns going on. But this is where it can really start turning into an all-day project as you start finding all the really interesting things you can do with the surface here. Okay, so just kind of imagine continuing with that process all over, and you can end up with a really nice branch. So even if you never really need to model a branch, these kinds of techniques come into play when sculpting pretty much anything organic and natural. So I'm sure you'll use these techniques again.